Jewish Channel's Week in Review. Our exclusive interview with Jon Huntsman. It's Hanukkah with Latke's music and Santa Claus. One woman sits down for her rights in Israel. And more of the Jewish news that's changing your world right now in this episode of the Week in Review. Hello, and welcome to the Jewish Channel's Week in Review. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. Ultra-Orthodox gender segregation continues to be the big news coming out of Israel. And now, many in Israel are rallying around one woman who refused to go to the back of a gender-segregated public bus. Tanya Rosenblit rode a bus line frequented by the ultra-Orthodox in Israel on Friday and refused to go to the back of the bus when ultra-Orthodox passengers asked her to do so. She shared her experience on Facebook, posting photos there as well, and her story has now become a national sensation, with some in Israel going so far as to compare her to Rosa Parks. Of course, Rosenblit, unlike Parks, was not arrested, but the situation did come to involve police when one ultra-Orthodox man stood in the doorway and refused to allow it to close unless Rosenblit would move to the back of the bus. The driver called the police to handle the man, which is the bus company's policy. A further controversy arose from the police officer's visit, however, when the police officer spoke with Rosenblit. As she wrote on Facebook, "The policeman came to me and asked if I was willing to respect them and sit in the back of the bus. I answered that I respected them enough by wearing modest clothes because I knew I was going to an Orthodox neighborhood, but I wouldn't be humiliated by those who can't even respect their own mothers and wives." The officer stepped down, and so did the leader of the little protest that was going on. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu cited the incident at a cabinet meeting Monday morning and condemned increased moves towards gender segregation in Israel. Speaking of Israel's culture of, quote, peaceful coexistence among different groups, Netanyahu said, "Recently we have witnessed attempts to fray this coexistence. I totally oppose this. I think that we must not let fringe groups dismantle our common ground, and we must preserve public spaces as open and safe spaces for all the citizens of Israel." Netanyahu wasn't the only government leader to involve himself in the Rosenblit story. Opposition leader Tzipi Livni of the Kadima party personally telephoned Rosenblit to discuss the situation, and Israeli Chief Rabbi Yonah Metzger, who is Orthodox, also joined in the condemnations, saying, "We don't have the authority to force our ideas on others. This country does not belong to the Haredi community." He continued, "If we want there to be segregation, it would be legitimate for us to establish our own transportation company." Metzger there was speaking of creating a separate private company as opposed to trying to impose gender segregation on the national bus line. Another story of gender segregation coming out of Israel this week has significant health implications for women. Breast cancer is a disease of which all Americans are aware, and it's a disease that can particularly affect Ashkenazi Jewish women. But clients of the third largest health insurer in Israel aren't being told about breast cancer. Rather, they are warned of, quote, special women's cancer in a mailing to clients for the insurer, Kupat Cholim Meuhedet, which serves a significant number of ultra-Orthodox Jews. The word breast appears nowhere in the 12-page booklet, according to Jerusalem Post columnist Jeff Barak. And this piece was also unlike most medical booklets about breast cancer in that it did not describe the exact nature of the disease and how to conduct a breast self-examination with accompanying photos or illustrations. Barak began his column with a statement, "Even I thought Hillary Clinton was overstepping the mark earlier this month when the U.S. Secretary of State said the treatment of women in Israel was reminiscent of the situation in Iran. That was until Kupat Cholim Meuhedet sent a booklet round to my house." You might think that all of these news events are creating public relations problems for Israel. Appropriately enough, several communications professionals got together last week to discuss Israel's public imaging problem, as Christian Neaton reports.
The basement of the Fifth Avenue Synagogue on Manhattan's Upper East Side is about 5,700 miles from Israel's media capital of Tel Aviv. Yet the public relations messages generated by Israel's distant capital city and their close-to-home repercussions was the topic of discussion among three high-profile American panelists representing the legal, journalistic, and PR fields in an event sponsored by the Allgemeiner news organization. 5W PR founder Ron Tarosian said Israel handles PR problems worse than other issues in the Jewish state.
You know, when Israel has financial problems, thank God they recruited Stanley Fischer, right? Very prominent economist who turned around the economy of Israel and has done great. But when Israel has communications problems, they don't think to speak to communications experts and to people who can make a difference instead of, again, as you know, to speak instead of a retired army general who might be great on the battlefield of war. but he's not great on the battlefield of communications. So I think that Israel constantly scores an F in the school of media and the school of PR, and it's a horrible shame.
Case in point for Torosian was an Israeli ministry's billboard and video ad campaign aimed at expatriate Israelis living in America, which the Jewish channel investigated, leading to the campaign's withdrawal.
You look last week at these commercials that the Israel Immigration Authority issued talking about, stupidity. It's the height of stupidity. In other words, if you're not familiar with these videos, they talk about Israelis marrying American Jews, and these reached mainstream media. Why would you bother to? It's not stupidity. It's beyond stupidity. I mean, I think that, and of course, the consul general didn't know anything about it, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs didn't know anything about it.
To see more of what this panel had to say about Israel's PR efforts, please tune into the full broadcast edition of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Christian. One area where Israel has been seeing its successes stack up is in the area of technology innovation. Google and Intel are two of the marquee companies that have established sizable offices in Israel to take advantage of the local workforce. Intel has 6 offices there, and Google has 2. And now Apple is getting in on the act. The producer of the iPod, iPhone, and iPad is looking for an Israeli pad to house approximately 200 employees. And innovation at Israel's universities is leading to rewards here in the United States as well. Cornell University and the Technion Israel Institute of Technology are partnering on a new science campus in New York City, the result of winning a competition launched by Mayor Michael Bloomberg to propose a high-tech campus. As a result of winning the competition, the partnered school will receive free land and $100 million in city subsidies. Moving on, one area of Jewish life that is always seeing innovation is in new twists on traditional foods. Meredith Gansman stopped by a latke competition to see what's cooking this Hanukkah.
Nothing makes Hanukkah sizzle like a pan of potato latkes. Now take this savory scene and multiply it by 17 chefs competing for the title of New York City's best latke, and you've got yourself one hot competition. At the Brooklyn Academy of Music's 3rd annual Latke Festival, 16 professional chefs and 1 home cook peeled, shredded, and fried their way to the top of the latke heap. Already elbow deep in potatoes, Chef Rob Garceau from Great Performances Catering Company said when it comes to making the best latke, it's all about the basics.
I think just hand grating the potatoes, lots of love.
Judge Mitchell Davis from the James Beard Foundation agreed, sharing his criteria for the perfect latke.
They've got to be crisp and flavorful, and I think they should taste like potatoes and maybe some onion, and they've got to be seasoned well and well cooked. And I mean, you're going up against every Jewish mother and grandmother throughout eternity, and so I think these chefs have a difficult task tonight.
For more from this year's Latke Fest, tune into the full broadcast version of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Meredith. One of the things we joke about on Hanukkah is the idea of a Jewish Santa Claus. Well, here's one. As Rabbi Joseph Eisenbach posts, this picture resulted from a Lubavitch chassid asking passersby if they were Jewish and if they'd put on tefillin that day. For this Santa Claus in Laguna Beach, California, it was his first time doing so. For a Hanukkah celebration involving more traditional Jewish characters, there's the Sephardic Music Festival. Rebecca Honig-Friedman reports.
What better way to celebrate Hanukkah than with some Jewish music? But this probably isn't the kind of Jewish music you're expecting. I'm here at Le Poisson Rouge in New York City for opening night of the Sephardic Music Festival, where musicians are exploring the spicier sounds of Spain, the Middle East, and North Africa. So put some hot sauce on your latkes and listen up. Now in its 7th year, the Sephardic Music Festival is the creation of Erez Safar, founder of Jewish music label Shemspeed, who also DJs under the name Duwan, often mixing in Middle Eastern and Mediterranean rhythms.
My background, my mom's side is Yemenite, so I've always been passionate about Middle Eastern music. And I felt like there was this sort of resurgence of klezmer, Eastern European music becoming hip or whatever, but there wasn't really that happening to Middle Eastern Sephardic music. So the idea was to try to fuse that and bring attention to it and all that. So instead of just doing one night or doing one project, I thought, just do a whole festival and bring in all sorts of groups.
Opening night at La Poisson Rouge featured an eclectic lineup of female-fronted bands, including The Mast, led by singer and guitarist Hale, who is of Persian descent, Pharaoh's Daughter, whose music takes inspiration from all over the Mediterranean and Middle East, and Mexican Jewish performer Nuria, whose family is originally from Syria and Iraq. For a complete schedule of events, go to SephardicMusicFestival.com. And to hear more from the musicians of the Sephardic Music Festival, watch the full broadcast version of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Rebecca. In a moment, we'll be airing excerpts of our exclusive interview with Republican presidential primary candidate Jon Huntsman. But first, President Barack Obama's campaign efforts for 2012 are underway as well. And last week, he stopped by the biennial conference of the Union for Reform Judaism. Here are some highlights of his 30-minute speech.
We stand with Israel as a Jewish democratic state because we know that Israel is born of firmly held values that we as Americans share. A culture committed to justice, a land that welcomes the weary, a people devoted to tikkun olam. So America's commitment and my commitment to Israel and Israel's security is unshakable. It is unshakable. I said it in September at the United Nations. I said it when I stood amid the homes in Sderot that had been struck by missiles. No nation can tolerate terror. No nation can accept rockets targeting innocent men, women, and children. No nation can yield to suicide bombers. And as Ehud has said, it is hard to remember a time when the United States has given stronger support to Israel on its security. In fact, I am proud to say that no U.S. administration has done more in support of Israel's security than ours. None. Don't let anybody else tell you otherwise. It is a fact.
And finally, in our continuing coverage of the 2012 election, you saw our interview last week with former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. For this week's news, I sat down with former Utah Governor Jon Huntsman, who is also running for the Republican Party's presidential nomination. Here are some highlights. Now, as a final question, abortion. The Jewish people have recognized actually an obligation to have abortions under certain circumstances relating to the health of the mother for thousands of years. So what do you have to say to Jewish women who want to be able to choose as a religious obligation on their own whether or not they should have an abortion in certain circumstances?
Well, I'm pro-life and deeply committed to that position. I have two little adopted girls, to prove that point and give me the ability to reflect every day on mothers who I'll never meet who chose life in their circumstances. I have exceptions for incest, rape, and life of the mother in terms of the way I see abortion. It's a core principle to me. It's a powerful core principle to me, and I understand how others, based on their own religious view, might see it a little differently. And so, what would you say to them if the government would try to intervene? What would I say to them if the government tried to in Israel? If there would if here in the United States. Here in the United States, if abortion laws would be passed at a federal level or at a state level. Well, right now we have Roe versus Wade, right, which I don't like, but that is the prevailing law. But so you respect the law of the land. Whether you like it or not, it is what it is today. Well, Newt Gingrich has called for recognizing personhood as beginning at conception based on the 14th Amendment, and that would override the Supreme Court in that case, since it's an amendment. Is it? Life begins at conception. Okay. I've always believed that, and that's my view of this particular issue.
You can see the full interview with the former governor on the Jewish Channel in the news category. That's all for this week. From all of us here at the Jewish Channel, be well. The Jewish Channel is available on cable. Time Warner Cable Channel 528, IO Optimum Channel 291, RCN Channel 268, Bright House Channel 330, Verizon Fios Channel 900, Cox Channel 1, Frontier Communications, and now on Comcast Cable in the on-demand menu under Premium Channels. For more information, visit tjctv.com.